Sony's censorship towards lewd or fan service games is well known and documented at this point. You can check out my previous video where I talk about not just Sony censorship, but also Steam censorship and outright banning of lewd games. Today I want to talk about the consequences of mass censorship from Sony. A big player in the fan service games market, Senran Kagura, has recently announced that their next game, Senran Kagura 7, is being reconsidered due to sexual content regulation from Sony, obviously. Here's an article from Gematsu detailing what's going on. In an interview with Inside Games, Senran Kagura producer and Honey Parade Games president Kenichiro Takaki discussed the current status of the PS4 title Senran Kagura 7. He said that the original idea the development team has imagined for Senran Kagura 7 would be impossible to release, so they are redoing, or rather reconsidering, everything about the game. The game was announced in August 2017, so it's been about a year and a couple of months since the announcement. Takaki did say that the regulation is not just limited to PlayStation, but it will also spread to every platform and genre. There could be even a time where the most popular gaming distribution platforms won't bother selling these fan service games, although I am quite surprised that their latest Senran Kagura game Burst Renewal was released uncensored on Steam. Takaki then said that it's not impossible considering the genre and its rich nature. It would be tough to make the game only for PC because PC has a lot of realistic shooters. What did realistic shooters have to do with anything? Your previous games have been relatively successful on PC. In fact, some people prefer to play it on PC. Most of your games don't really need a demanding system to run. He then said that there are uncertainties of whether or not they can make these games only for the PC. Well, you don't have to actually just make it for the PC. You can also make it for the Nintendo Switch. This article proves to me that the people who are making these fan service anime games don't really know how powerful the PC market is in regards to these types of games, especially in Asia, considering the dying console market in there, which I've also talked about in another video. They're still having a very old mindset that these sorts of games would sell well with consoles, and despite this news happening since around June last year, quite a lot of game developers are still sticking in the console market when they should move into the PC, especially when they're not allowing these sorts of games on their platform. And this brings me to the relevant question in this video. Despite the console gaming market stagnating in Asia, and especially Japan, which is the reason why Sony moved their entire gaming HQ into California, why are there still game developers who make games on the PS4? Well, it's actually pretty simple, and the only way for you to understand this is if you see it on the developer's perspective. On the consumer's perspective, people will see that they have moved on to PC and mobile, but on the developers and publishers' perspective, the people who buy their games the most are still on the console market. It's a market that would guarantee sales for their type of games. Senran Kagura is a good example of this. The first game of the series was released in 3DS, but the series gained its popularity in the PlayStation platforms. There is a market for Senran Kagura on the PC worldwide, but since most people in Japan already play the game on the PlayStation, there won't be a lot of people who buy them again on the PC. If they decided out of the blue that they're just gonna abandon the PlayStation altogether, that means they would lose a sizable chunk of their fan base that bought their previous games and brought them into where they are today. I mean, sure, their games still sell well on the PC and the Switch, but a good chunk of their fan base are still gaming on the PS4, or at least they think they are. Since people usually don't sell their PS4 in Japan, as far as I know at least, it's a safer choice for them to still stay on the PS4 and make games for the PS4 market. The same is true for a lot of Japanese game developers and publishers these days. The Yakuza games are always PlayStation based, and the series built its fan base on the PlayStation console. The recent move to PC is a way to Sega to see if there's an interest for Yakuza games on the PC, and thus we have Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, which will be coming to the PC in a couple of days. Another reason why Japanese game developers make games for the PS4 more is because they are more familiar with the PS4 architecture. For now, only the big publishers like Bandai Namco, Capcom, or Sega that have people who port their games to the PC and can actually port them well. That's mostly because their games are running on an engine that makes it easier for them to port their games to the PC. It takes a while for game developers to learn how to design their games on the PC, especially when they're made in an engine that is quite difficult to be adapted to the PC. Simply put, these game developers develop games on the PS4 because it's a safer choice, at least on their perspective. They build their fan base on that platform and they want to guarantee profit, so they just go into that platform because, in their perspective, people who play these sorts of games are playing them in the PS4. And yes, there are still people who play console games in Japan. The console market is dying, but that doesn't mean that they don't game in consoles. They still do, and you only need to buy a PS4 once. It's just that the market shows more interest on the PC and the mobile and the Switch in Japan. Again, I talked about this in detail in another video. The key thing to note here is that the shift of interest is relatively new, which means that trying to appeal to an entirely new platform is a risk to these developers because they don't really know if the people who buy their games are also playing games in that platform. For example, people who develop games on the PlayStation and build their fan base on the PlayStation don't really know if their fan base also play games in other platforms. If you have a PS4, why would you buy a PC? And vice versa. As much as we all love gaming, it's quite rare to see people who own games and play games on multiple platforms, especially in Asia. I have a PC, Nintendo Switch, and a PS4. I'm actually a minority in the gaming space. I don't really know the statistics of how many next-gen gaming platforms that people own, at least in Japan. I did ask around 1,700 people on my Twitter, which I know it isn't always a great source, and most of my viewers are going to be American, but what I found out on that poll is that most people seem to own at least 2 of the next-gen gaming platforms. So there is still hope that the people who own a PS4 and playing PS4 games are going to have either a PC or a Switch, at least according to my poll, which again isn't always reliable. The Switch especially is a very attractive console that offers portability, and their censorship rules aren't as strict as the PlayStation. I think most people who are fans of fan service games are willing to grab a Nintendo Switch because that's where the censorship is less egregious in fan service games. I think game developers and publishers in Japan who are still developing games on the PS4 need to understand that a good chunk of their fan base do have other platforms and they do play games in those platforms as well. If the PS4 is going to lead you to a state where you have to rework your game in its entirety thanks to the censorship rules, then my suggestion is to put these games on the PC or the Switch. Those 2 platforms are significantly safer. Senran Kagura arrives uncensored on PC despite Steam's brand new regulations, and the Switch, well, there's already a Senran Kagura game in the Switch. Tell these game developers that there are people who want their games on the PC or the Switch and they're going to buy their games there. They just don't know about it yet, or they do know about it and they're afraid to take the risk. If you want this market of fan service games to evolve, you cannot have it to be censored and regulated by the Puritans that control the platform. You need to have these games as they are intended to be. Pure fan service goodness, and you need to have them in the platforms that allow them to be as such. If more fan service oriented games go to Sony, then we're not going to see these games evolve. We're going to see them devolve into something that is more mainstream and family friendly. Those games will completely lose its appeal the moment the censors at Sony decide how these games should go. You can either have these games to be dictated by Sony, or you can have these games dictated by you and release them in platforms that don't censor them. It's all up to you, game developers, and in all honesty, it's all up to you too, dear viewers. If you want these games to arrive on the Switch or the PC, be active in social media and tell these game developers about it. Otherwise, they're just gonna stay silent and continue making games on a platform that will censor them and ruin their games. Before we end this video, I want to say huge thanks to Makai99.9 for the pledge on Patreon. You are fantastic.